Yes, let's do it.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today. And before we get started with the introductions of this wonderful woman, I just wanted to ask, are there any new Bridge Association members or affiliates joining us today? And if so, unmute yourself and shout out. We definitely want to welcome you. Well, in case you're shy and you're out there, we welcome you, and please make a habit of this. Check out our website. We have so many upcoming events, education, trainings, courses. We are on fire this year, so make sure you check out the website. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce a very special person. Farrah Wilder is the California Association of Realtors Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. Farrah supports CAR's fair housing and inclusion efforts. She collaborates with internal and external partners and key stakeholders, including CAR members, realtor associations, and others on initiatives that will dramatically heighten awareness, allyship, equity, and capabilities within the realtor community, the real estate industry, and beyond. Prior to working for CAR, Farrah was a realtor with Compass and a founder of a real estate team based in Oakland. Farrah served on the boards of Oakland and Oakland-Berkeley Association of Realtors from 2014 to 2017, and was 2018 chair of CAR's federal committee. She was a founding member of the Bridge Association of Realtors Housing Committee, a group that has advised on home buyers assistance programs, lobbied local government officials to prioritize down payment assistance programs and the needs of small housing providers in their budget and policy directives, and created a successful closing cost grant for first-time homebuyers. Farrah earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from the University of Michigan and a JD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As an attorney, she worked, it's amazing. She worked for San Francisco nonprofit Equal Rights Advocates and the United States Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. It is indeed my great pleasure to introduce my friend Farrah Wilder, CAR Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. Thank you so much, Farrah, for being here.
Thank you so much for that really warm welcome, Janine. It means so much. And I mean, I miss you now that I'm in this new role, but it's always a pleasure to do this great work with you. And also it's great to be back with my home association. So hi, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. I see myself delaying. Am I delaying on your end? I'm good? Okay. Okay, so yes, and so many of you know that I was a realtor there at Bridge in your market for 13 years, and I've transitioned into this new role now. It's been a year and a half, which is crazy, and I've been putting together some of that history that Janine talked about that I had before I became a realtor, all of this great experience that I got as a real estate agent and a realtor in the wonderful market of Oakland and Berkeley and Alameda and Richmond and all of these areas that we all work in, and bringing all of that experience into this role. And so I'm really honored to share this presentation with you, and I'd love for it to be interactive. So there are going to be some times when I ask some questions, and I also am going to acknowledge, and this is something that D'Anthony Nelson, by the way, is with me. He works with me at CAR, so you'll see him. You see him on camera. So D'Anthony and I were just chatting about how this work, the journey of this work, is not to get it right. The journey of diversity and hi, Karen. The journey of this work is to be able to engage in the conversations, is to not have people feel like they are disappeared, marginalized, not acknowledged. Hi, Moya. That we can finally start to make sure that as organizations, businesses, that we are providing services that are addressing the needs of more and more people in society. And I see my really good friend Jay just came on camera. Hi there. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen and we'll get into it. And so, all right, so Janine, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see everything? Okay, so I'm doing this on Canva. which is beautiful, but can be kind of glitchy. So if I go backward when I mean to go forward, that's just part of how it is. Okay. So this is what I'm going to cover. So DEI basics. So I know for some of you, you will be involved in the Realtor Association and organizations and things like that. But for many of you, and I know this is going to be recorded, it's being recorded. So, you know, for the realtor community in general, we're going to just kind of take it down to the basics. What is DEI? Why is that important for your business? How does it connect to fair housing? And then I'll offer resources and be here for questions. Okay, so diversity, and I also will give you these slides so that you can have them and keep them as a resource. So diversity is essentially the mix. This is the who in your group. It's demographics. It's not just race. It's you know, we can think about disability, sexual orientation. Within our real estate community and neighborhoods, veterans present diversity, age diversity, disability. So all of those demographic groups make up diversity. And so my title is Diversity DEI Officer, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've got to define these terms because they all kind of make up the work of doing diversity work that everyone who has a business, everyone who's involved in a group should be mindful of. So inclusion, and I'm not going to use the typical analogy that people use with inclusion, the dance, all that. I want to make it even more clear. When you have diversity and you have these people in the room, it's not enough just to have people from different demographic groups present. It's really important that their input is valued, that their input is able to help shape the organization, that they have leadership paths through the organization. So, and also that it's a culture where someone who says something different, or even challenging of the way we always do things, that's something that is valued because it's actually helping to make the organization better. So that's what inclusion is. And then equity, and and that we build our skills of having those difficult conversations. And then equity is being able to take into account varying needs. So sometimes we get these letters, you said equity, why didn't you say equality? Equity doesn't sound fair. Well, and a great example that I have of that, and I see Janine is wearing her glasses and I wear contacts. So John A. Powell from Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute gives a great example of if you gave everyone glasses of one prescription, and you said everyone has to wear these glasses and try and see. Some people would see really well. Some people would not be able to see at all. And so we do this when we do our real estate policy and business. For seniors, we know there are specific challenges, millennials, disabled individuals with different kinds of disabilities. There's not a one size fits all way to live in a home or to address homeownership challenges. And in particular, if we're talking about people of color, and we do sometimes focus on race because of the particular history of exclusion, unfortunately, against people of color that leads them now to certain present challenges. We need to make sure that we're specifically looking at specific challenges. And there are certain communities of color, for example, people who might have limited English proficiency, who may need materials or language support, which CAR is, supports with and is trying to do more and more with. That is what equity is. And so there are principles of equity that you can apply to your organizations and your business. Okay, so it's with diversity, it's important to make the business case for diversity. Like, why should every single person who has a business, who is involved in a group, be concerned about diversity? It is a business imperative because we have diverse communities, and in order to properly serve them and understand their needs and design services and products as a realtor, to make sure that if you support an entire community where you live, it's a business imperative so that you make sure that you understand and are properly supporting the diversity within society. 67% of job seekers consider diversity when evaluating companies and job offers. It's important to consumers. It's important to, if you're a broker, it's important to people who, it was important to me when I was looking to move offices. I went and looked at the roster to see what kind of diversity was in that office. And so it's really important to people and becoming more and more important. We're seeing advertising. I know for me, when I don't see any diversity on, in a magazine or a catalog, I'm like, where have they been? So this is where we are in society. Diverse teams make better decisions 87% of the time. So here's the thing about that. That saying, they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So it's not necessarily easy to make sure that all the different perspectives get vetted and get discussed, and people sometimes feel some kind of way, if a point they brought up is questioned. But this is how we avoid blind spots. This is how we make sure our marketing is sensitive. So diverse teams make more thoughtful and better decisions. And inclusive companies outperform others 8-1. So think about it from the perspective of your business. So if you have products that reflect a variety of different needs in the market, if you have services, as a real estate agent that, you can help a lot of different folks in the market. You are able to have a much broader reach than, if you are only servicing, a very particular closed group of people, and your team is only thinking in one kind of way. And you're being innovative, of course. Okay. And so more about the importance of diversity. So different groups have different needs. Think language, think, because of a history of discrimination. I use POC for shorthand. That's people of color. This is not all the time. This is an average. We have people of color who have quite a bit of wealth, but because of a history of discrimination, different communities have less access to generational wealth. Thinking, the LGBTQ community comes up too sometimes with that. And there are cultural differences in needs. We talked about language needs for some folks. There are other multi-generational families are more common, for certain communities. So understanding and being able to serve those needs is really important for a business person, particularly in real estate. Bias is a liability. So, I try to not just make it about compliance, although the reality is that unchecked bias is unfortunately way too common in our industry, and we're going to talk more about that. But inadvertent different treatment can lead real estate professional to be very vulnerable to fair housing testers. And we'll talk about the NEWSDAY investigation that found that kind of different treatment to be really rampant. And then diversity is here. So homeowners and realtors should reflect the diversity of the community. So, and in the Bay Area is one of the most diverse places in the country, that I'm also blessed to have that be as my second home. We know that making sure that your business, your organizations reflect the community is really important. And there's tons of diversity in the Bay Area to be mindful of. Okay, so I often talk about history. It is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's interesting, but beyond the fact that it's interesting, it's important when we talk about diversity and fair housing. And the reason why, and I'm going to touch on history here, is that realtors played an unfortunate role in upholding policies that kept people of color from owning homes in particular. And I've been mining a lot of the data. I will go into it a little bit, but I have articles on top of articles of some really terrible history. And I know that, and shout out to Bridge and Divina and Kieran, who allowed me to look at some of the archives there, because you also have it there. But this is part of realtor history. And then as you encounter clients, who may have been impacted by a history of exclusion, there is trauma. So properly serving people of color, people who have been excluded, in the past, or who may be concerned about bias, it can be really helpful to be mindful of this history so that our businesses can be more sensitive. they can feel gaslighted, and it's really common. Some people, it's an uncomfortable topic. They go, that was the past. I don't think, everything's fine. But it's important to be mindful and be sensitive and be able to hear and hold space for that trauma that comes up. And some of it wasn't that long. We know that people of color were targeted for predatory loans during the lead up to the foreclosure crisis that happened starting in 2008. And so some of this is recent, and also so that when we know about it, we can hopefully try not to repeat the mistakes of history, but we have to talk about it. And then also the history helps us explain the reasons for racial wealth disparities. So sometimes, I've heard, people just need to understand the value of homeownership. We just need to make sure these communities understand better. And without understanding this massive exclusion that happened in history, we are really misdiagnosing the reason why we have homeownership disparities. And then also, there are myths and stereotypes that are, related to, having an improper explanation for the disparities. And it's important to properly diagnose why we are where we are so that we can come up with thoughtful solutions. Okay, so a little bit more about history. So realtors early on were involved in all this great stuff that we still largely are involved in, lobbying, and some of it's building out communities. California back in the early 1900s was very new. So there was a need for infrastructure, residential development, promoting professionalism. There were a lot of, kind of shady individuals who were out there, trying to sell. They were selling basically something that didn't exist. Sometimes they had a piece of property they were going to sell and they didn't have the right to sell it. And also developing industry standards, like the appraisal industry and valuation, and getting, realtor education going. However, there is a big part of that history was there was a link of race and valuation. And so it was a very exclusive community at the time. It was all white men. It was assumed, there was this viewpoint that having diversity or people of color in your neighborhood would bring your property values down. You hear that and see that all the time in these old materials. And so that is why the Realtor Code of Ethics made it a violation, an ethical violation, to take a race of people into a neighborhood where they were restricted from or would not be welcome in. And you saw a lot of the restrictive covenants, which we unfortunately still see today in many of our California markets, being put into property deeds, which we'll talk about. So that's, something that realtors were, a lot of them were developers. Okay, so this is how realtors were involved in, kind of creating the segregated communities that came about. They started, in the early 1900s, and we still see this segregation today. So the Code of Ethics, the restrictive covenants. I have one from Danville, actually, and the Federal Housing Administration. We were a part, as an organization. NAR was lobbying for a central bank for loans. And as we know, redlining came out of the federal government, but realtors were, before that came about, were involved in lobbying the federal government for these loans and for the 25-year, I think at the time, and fixed mortgages that were inexpensive, that really developed the middle class. But it was based on some of these valuation models that we really helped kind of create and evolve and develop. And I say that to say that many of our folks in our realtor community say, well, that wasn't us at the time. Realtors were just doing what they were told to do from the government. And Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, really lays out the federal government's involvement. But it's also important for us to understand our power in some of these bad practices, and it helps us understand our power for doing things good, and also really helps us understand how the history worked. So a lasting impact is persistent segregation. And I know in the Bay Area, we still see these legacies here: wealth and homeownership gaps, persistent bias, and industry-wide diversity challenges. And I know that, the Bay Area is a wonderful place where diversity tends to be valued, but we still, continue to have to be introspective and work on these things. So I do have something, if you want to put in the chat, I have a redlining map on the next slide. And I think that if we think about our communities today, based on what we know about Oakland and Berkeley, does anyone want to guess where the green? So green was where they were exclusively white, restrictive covenants, or they were seen as less risky neighborhoods were, or where the red neighborhoods were. And then I'm going to show the map, and we can see if we know based on what we assume. Does anyone want to share? The hills were white. Okay, so Moya's got a guess.
At 580, well, it was before 580, so I don't know what the divide line was between the hills and the flatlands for Oakland.
Yeah, so there's that dividing, like if you go above 580 and below 580. Okay. It's good that I saw him right now. I'm in Michigan, but I also have a home in Oakland, and I was there for 18 years. So, okay. Oop, that went backwards. See, it happens sometimes on Canva. Okay, so here's the map. So you can see, yes, so below you've got yellow and red, and then you've got the hills, which are especially around that Montclair area, it's green and blue. And then West Oakland and all below San Pablo and Berkeley is red. So what that suggests is that there is a legacy of these redlining maps. Just because redlining became illegal doesn't mean that all of a sudden you now have a mix. It didn't cure the issue of segregation. And so this is something to give us pause and help us really understand that we still have a lot of work to do. Okay, so fair housing. So diversity and fair housing. So fair housing is linked to diversity. It's not the same thing. Sometimes people say DEI and they mean fair housing. But it is not the same thing, because fair housing is really more about the policies and practices that help, not discriminate or address the legacy of discrimination and address homeownership gaps. Okay, so here are some statistics from our amazing research and economics team about the homeownership rates based on ethnicity. So we can see that in California, and actually California has the lowest homeownership rate. It's not the lowest, the second lowest in the country, unfortunately. So we've got work to do for everyone. But Black people in California have the lowest homeownership rate. And we have Latinx on here. We also say Latino, Hispanic homeownership rate is also significantly lower than the white homeownership rate. And then the Asian homeownership rate is lower than the white homeownership rate. However, what I will say is when you disaggregate this data, and something we want to start doing more and more, and the ARIA data in the Asian Real Estate Association of America, their report disaggregates the data, and we find that even within the Asian community, the AAPI community, there are some groups that have significantly lower homeownership rates than is 61%. So we definitely do not want to smush it all together and disregard some needs that are within each and every one of these communities. Okay, so we can't talk about fair housing without talking about bias, because a lot of the different ways that different groups get treated differently has to do with implicit bias. Most people are not out there, saying, I want to treat people differently. I think, I have a group that I favor more than others. So bias, what is it? It's a tendency, inclination, or prejudice towards or against something or someone. And it can be explicit, it can be on the surface, I could be knowing about it, or it can be unconscious. And a lot of times with fair housing, it's underneath the surface. So people are naturally biased. We have stereotypes. Sometimes, you catch yourself and you go, oh my God, why did I have that thought? It's because you're a human. And some of them, it's like, I just have an affinity for those people, they're my people, but we all have these things, but they can lead to some business practices that result in different treatment. And so the last point here is that unconscious bias becomes problematic when it causes an individual or group to treat others poorly or more favorably as a result of their gender, ethnicity, race, or other factors. Okay, so I made these slides. I'm going to admit this is not the first group that I talked about competitive markets with, but I know that the East Bay is one of the most competitive markets in the state, and it's painfully competitive. So what is the challenge with bias in competitive markets? So there are sellers who ask blatantly, like, can I have more information about the buyers or that buyer, before they make their decision, which oftentimes ends up leading to demographic information because the pre-approval's there, the terms are there, they want to know about demographics. There are, yes, Denise, hi, I see Denise in the chat. I didn't see you in the thing. You can absolutely have the map and the entire presentation. So there are stereotypes that are based on race that still exist that really impact whether people think people can buy. There's preferences. I have heard, as progressive as the Bay Area is, there are just really unfortunate stereotypes that continue to exist. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward yet. There was one more thing. Okay, so groups that are less likely to have large down payments. So think about people of color, maybe who were excluded in the past from homeownership totally, or were, if they did own homes, they had to do so at great expense, predatory lending, all of that. They have, and also living in red line communities, they have less equity, less family equity to buy, more student loans. And so they may have less money to purchase. And so they're going to be particularly disadvantaged in expensive markets. And many of the folks here will know that inherently. I worked in the East Bay market too, so I remember that. Okay, so and a really important study, if you have not seen it, is the NEWSDAY investigation. It's been out for a few years. It came out at the end of 2019. It was in Long Island, New York, the NEWSDAY investigation. And what they did was they sent fair housing testers to real estate professionals. And they did it where the only major difference was race. They had them dressed similarly, they had similar financial profiles, and they found that 19% of Asian buyers were treated differently, 39% of Latino buyers were treated differently, and 49% of Black buyers were treated differently. And differently doesn't just mean showing different neighborhoods. It means higher standards before you'll work with a client. I need a pre-approval for you before I show. Don't need a pre-approval for you before I show you houses. I'm showing you these neighborhoods. I'm showing you those neighborhoods. So that it was in New York, but I would say that since we all have bias, if we don't have a way to be really consistent with our clients, then the potential to do that could be there for just about any real estate professional. Yes, Carla, Marin as well. Oakland too, there's a couple of cases in Oakland where, there's questions of bias. So absolutely here in California. So examples of bias in the home search. So agents steering buyers, that's, something that people often think about, taking these folks to this neighborhood. And it doesn't have to just do with race. What if you had someone who had a family and you thought, oh my gosh, I think this is a great school district. I'm going to tell them they want to live here, versus letting them come up with the neighborhood. So that's potential bias, right? Inferring race from buyer names. So with offers or anything like that, buyer letters, maybe even having more demographic information in there, that could lead to a bias. Sellers preferring certain demographics. So that could be implicit or explicit. Sometimes I've heard unfortunate things from sellers when I was working in the market, but those are all examples that, just from even my personal experience, I remember coming up in the market. Okay. I also have to remind this group, and I'm sure and we take our fair housing training every 4 years, but there are 22 protected categories in California. That's a lot to remember. And in the federal law, there's only 7. In the Realtor Code of Ethics, there's 9. And so these things can be really hard to kind of all hold. And there's easy ways to make sure that you're not treating people different based on demographics. And I will say there is case law that any arbitrary characteristics. So let's say, you have a client that's looking at offers and they're like, oh, that person's a lawyer. I think they're going to try to negotiate, or I think they're going to sue. Like, I don't know, like that. I'm not I don't have my lawyer hat on. I am inactive with the bar. I'm just putting this on your radar that, you want to make sure your clients know that these demographic things, can really be broad, and how the Department of Fair Employment and Housing is looking at these things. Okay, so there is a book that I read, and I thought it raised some questions that would be good for us to kind of ponder as a group. So, and it's called, let's see, it's called Race Brokers, and I have a link to it down there. I have it in the list of resources at the end of the training. And I'm just going to mention the thoughts that came up, because basically what this book is talking about is how realtors in Houston, Texas, which is the market she studied, the author is a professor, how the agents kind of assessed the ability to buy, or what neighborhoods they wanted to work in, or even would take different folks to different places based on race. And they'd say, you don't want to be there. They would sometimes say it explicitly, based on race, and which is, of course, potentially illegal at this point. We think this kind of thing isn't happening, but it's still happening like now. So the questions that came to me after reading that book are, how might bias, perceived return on investment, play a role in your sphere of influence, or where you prospect? Are you thinking certain communities will result in more ability to buy, or more money? And sometimes it's potentially based on race, unfortunately. Could bias color what neighborhoods are shown to certain clients? Like, if people aren't aware, do they maybe make assumptions? Might some agents have assumptions about whether someone can afford to buy based on race, age, etc.? And of course, folks who are really thinking about these things understand bias, might have found ways to disrupt that. But, if it's a new topic for people, kind of pondering these things can kind of help maybe institute some business practices where we avoid these kinds of biases that, are easy to have if we don't think about them. Is there a possibility that race, familial status, or other demographic factors play a role? And if there are assumptions that certain, okay, I wrote this really quickly. I'm making sure this makes sense. I'll fix any typos before I send it to you. Are there assumptions that certain loan types aren't good for sellers, FHA, VA? Okay, no, that makes sense. If there are assumptions, does that have more of an impact on people of color and homeownership gaps? So let's just think about this. There are loan options that tend to be helpful for people with less generational wealth. We also know veterans are a very diverse community. So if you're having the lower down payment loans, where the people that have more people of color using them, Latinos, Black folks, tend to use FHA loans more than white people. The VA, like I said, is a very diverse community of people, and maybe sometimes people's only option is a VA loan. Is a bias against those particular loans impacting the ability of these communities to become homeowners? So just some food for thought. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some business practices. Okay, so one really easy thing to do, and something that CAR you'll see a lot more, we're making sure that our panels are diverse. If you see our marketing, we have a lot of different kinds of folks in there, and that signals that you are open for business to everybody. When people look at your marketing and they see diversity on there, they go, okay, this is a welcoming place for me. And I have some examples here. And then make sure that that's not the only thing that you do, because, just this is performative. You also have to have an inclusive business. So, okay, so some skills and tools that you can use to help diversify your business. Learn about first-time buyer programs. And I have some statistics here about why people of color are much more likely to use FHA. And I'm using FHA as an example. There are other programs, but this is nationwide data. Black households are more than twice as likely to have student loan debt than white ones. So meaning that in order to get over the hump, they often will need a little bit more of a boost. So understanding those programs will help you diversify your services to communities of color that may have less access to generational wealth and home equity. Lenders, HUD counselors, referral partners. Why do I have 3 R's in there? I don't know. That's a typo. Canva does not do the spell check very good. So I will reduce the number of R's in there, but you know what I mean. So when even you may have a niche, some people only do listings. This is not to suggest that you have to work within markets or different communities than you do, but making sure that that if someone comes to you as a business person and you have the ability to link them with someone who can help them, or if you do work with first-time buyers, having the tools in your toolkit to basically be able to make sure that your clients are connected with down payment assistance programs. I know, Janine, right? Like, no spell check. So down payment assistance programs or HUD counselors can really help make sure that all of the different programs are exposed to your clients, and then you can kind of like work with that client to use all of these resources that they've been exposed to. So that can help you work with folks with less generational wealth. So if you have a team, maybe kind of bringing folks onto your team who work with first-time buyers or who can learn the programs, or even identifying other realtors in your market that know these kinds of programs that you can send clients to and refer them to, so that people don't get out of the loop. Because the last point is never tell someone they can't buy. And I remember this vividly in the East Bay. The market was like doing this the whole time I was in real estate. And, if someone got out of the market, they might try to get back in, and either it was way more expensive for them, but sometimes they literally just could not buy. So if someone is thinking they want to buy and might be able to buy, interest rates are going up right now, don't say they can't. You might go, I don't know, they have a low credit score, I don't know how this person can buy. And a lender or a HUD counselor might say, oh, just pay this off and you're in there. Here's this down payment assistance program, you're in there. You might not be aware of what can help them. And I've heard stories of people going, oh yeah, I didn't think they could buy, I just told them they couldn't buy. Or people came to me and they had been told they couldn't buy. Luckily, they didn't get discouraged. But given the history of trauma, many people of color may get discouraged if they're told they cannot buy. Okay, I want to talk about some programs that CAR has that can help you with your clients who might have less generational wealth. We have a program called Steps Towards Homeownership, and we cover down payment assistance programs, how to really help first-time buyers, particularly those with less generational wealth, get to the point where they're able to make offers. And this is particularly great for folks who are working with the first-time buyers, people who are working with down payment assistance programs. So that next event is on April 6th at 10. So just go to on.car.org, steps 6. We have an amazing program. I will say it was incubated at Bridge. So we have a closing cost grant, and I know Bridge and OBAR had a closing cost grant, and I see Janine nodding. That Janine, I remember you were at the rollout for that great program. And so, using the lessons that we learned at Bridge, CAR also has a statewide closing cost grant program, and it is for members of underserved communities. And you can find the definition on our website. So that is only for people who, not just based on race, but people with disabilities, people from the LGBTQ community. So making sure that there's additional support for first-time buyers who may otherwise not have that generational wealth to access. So we just rolled it out. We're working with Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services in the Bay Area. So, and I know they're a friend of Bridge. So that's a program we are so proud to roll out. And then also we have a Hispanic and Latino consumer ad campaign. So this is resources, some of them in Spanish, that really help connect. You can use for your business to help connect you with Latino consumers, maybe folks who are limited English proficient, who are looking for information about working with you or working with a realtor and buying a home. So you can see there's a link here. And again, I'll give you these slides after I fix the typos. And you can kind of connect with that. We also have the RPA, a guide for the RPA in Spanish. And we're just trying to make sure that as much as possible, we're helping our members work with diverse communities in their business. Okay, so things that you can do on, in your team and your brokerage. So think about, hiring and how you hire, and making sure that you have folks who can serve a variety of different communities. Because first of all, it's great for business. That is not the reason why we really talk about it. It is great for business, but it also really helps make sure that you're not incapable or unable to really serve the diversity in the market. Be inclusive. So remember, we talked about that definition of inclusive. As you've got diversity in your team or in your group, make sure you're listening to those different voices, giving folks a leadership role, making sure that it's a good culture, a great place, to kind of come in and be your unique, wonderful self. Allyship. So allyship is a term that means, you are, and I'm an ally to some communities that I'm not in. If you're not in a community, but you are elevating and supporting, folks in those communities, because this is how, we get there. Some groups are very small, and without partnership, collaboration, sponsors, their voice isn't elevated. So if you hear microaggressions, or someone saying something insensitive, or someone who brings up a different point who is, dismissed, even saying, I want to hear what that person has to say, or that's a great point, is a way of being an ally. Or going to various, multicultural organizations or different events where it might be a community you're not in, but showing support to that community is a way to be an ally. And then mentorship. So finding ways to, especially some of our top producing agents in the market, they might even need help with their business, and so finding ways to kind of connect with, or show your skills, or show your, some of the ways of doing real estate to people who might represent diversity is a way to kind of help diversify both your business and the real estate industry and the realtor community. Okay, so buyer letters. Okay, so I remember recommending buyer letters. I'm going to be completely real. I would always look and go, oh, no, you can't mention demographics. It's a hard market. It's tough out there in the streets of the East Bay. But the issue with buyer letters, and, we're going to talk about this whenever we talk about fair housing, is with connected to bias, is that oftentimes they talk about demographics that even if the seller goes, I didn't pick it based on that, in their because bias often flies below the radar, they don't realize it. So I put some things that people tend to say in the buyer letters. I can't wait to raise my family there. Christmas dinner will be great in that dining room. I have this disability, and the fact that there's no stairs here is great. And it could go one way or the other. It could encourage someone to feel like they want to take that offer. It might discourage them. So it raises potential issues. And the point really is to protect yourself and your client. So I'm raising this issue. It's not to say buyer letters are not illegal. They're just potentially raising these things that could lead someone really to have a fair housing issue. Okay, so the photos, I kind of want to stress, a lot of times we see photos, and something you can do is, and we have the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory with a contract now, is in your listing, in the MLS, or, you can say, if your client is not wanting to potentially be swayed, or not wanting that potential liability, it's also in the listing agreement. You can kind of let the buyer's agents know, like, please no buyer letters. And I know this is not a new concept. I'm bringing it up again because it's just a big challenge in competitive markets. Some people are like, we're still going to use buyer letters, like that's how we get our offers accepted. Okay, so if you're not using buyer letters, how do you make a strong offer? And I'm saying this, from my experience, working in this very competitive market. And I did this training for a community group. So it was like folks who were real estate agents and some people who were not. So I'm recommending that people use their realtor for guidance. Some people say, I want to write a letter. Actually, each house is going to be more or less competitive. Realtors know what you need to do. making sure that people are fully pre-approved. We know this really well in the East Bay. Before offering, have the lender call the listing agent, clean offers, sweeten the deal, find out what the seller wants, and see if you can make it happen. And also, as a realtor, being timely in your responses, like being that person that the listing agent goes, you know what, they're great to work with. They're great to work with. Okay, so these resources, again, some of these resources were for people in the community. Department of Fair Employment and Housing is where you and buyers and sellers can find out more about California Fair Housing Law. Fair Housing California.org is CAR's public-facing fair housing website. We have a lot of resources there. NAR's At Home with Diversity and Fair Haven are great programs that NAR puts on to help you learn more about diversity and fair housing. And then I have some links to articles about buyer letters, some of the challenges, making strong offers, tips, and the issue with bias in fair housing. And then, of course, some additional resources, books that I think are really helpful, and some other things. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case there are questions. I think we made pretty good time. Trying to see, where do I stop sharing my screen here?
Just go to the bottom.
I know it's not doing. I'm like, what screen is the bottom? Like,
We have a lot of tabs up.
I have
Lordy.
Oh, I know. You can probably see like everything, huh?
Everything.
I know. I can. I'm looking for my stop share. I don't want
That was incredible information, as we all knew it would be, man. And yes, everyone will get the slides, the recording. It will be in the resources section of our website by end of day, is what Emily's saying. Anybody have any questions? Let's open it up.
I mean, what challenges are you experiencing in your market? I mean, I know this whole buyer letter thing is hard when things are competitive. I know that's a thing. And also just the competitive nature of the market makes it so that, if you don't have as much down, it can be really challenging. So.
Hi, Farrah. It's
So
Denise. Hi.
Hi.
It's so great to see your face. And of course, the information was thorough and very, very, a lot of times when you get this information, it can be overwhelming, but I think you did a great job of presenting it in a very digestible way. I know that right now, with interest rates going up and home prices not necessarily skyrocketing, but still very much elevated, the challenge is just getting folks in these groups, first-time home buyers, maybe low down payments, and even now, just very solidly middle-class folks, but still first-time home buyers into neighborhoods that were traditionally affordable, and trying to find the resources to either increase their buying power or increase their down payment is extremely, extremely difficult. So that's one of the challenges just coming up, just people who 2 years ago could be able to buy in certain neighborhoods just can't anymore. And then still those quote unquote certain neighborhoods having a negative connotation sometimes. And I say this as a lifelong East Oakland resident.
Denise, so it is great to hear your voice and see your picture today. And I know that you and I did work for many, many years together on what you're talking about, trying to make sure there are tools and resources for helping people, anyone, become a homeowner, everybody become a homeowner. I do have it's not easy, and it's not an easy silver bullet solution, but I do have some guidance, and some of it informed by the work that you and I did for many years, is that, well, first of all, everyone should be aware of the AC Boost program in Alameda County that gives over $200,000 right now to qualified first-time buyers for their down payment. And that is a powerful program. And the thing that was so great about it, and when I was a member of Bridge, Denise, myself, and maybe some other people on the call, if I'm missing anyone who participated in this process, I'm sorry. I know Stephanie Christmas was involved, but they really reached out to realtors to help shape that program. And it is not always easy to help shape down payment assistance programs. The city of Oakland has one, and we had a lot of criticisms of it, but continuing to go to city council meetings and talk to the housing authorities to see about making those programs more accessible, more market responsive, talking about your experiences, bringing your clients. I know Karen's client shared her story with us at our Ledge Day last year, kind of talking about those things and continuing to do that work can be helpful. There is a will and a desire out there to address some of these challenges. I do think that many people in the nonprofit space and the government space do understand the value of homeownership. They do not always understand how to make it happen. The brain trust that you have here is that realtors understand how to make it happen. So I encourage you, not that all of you have a ton of free time, but to use your voice to help shape those programs. And then there are communities that are starting to grapple with this and maybe even, helping offer them tools on how to create their programs. And then with your clients, of course, you don't want to really get too much into demographics, but helping the sellers understand, FHA is not always going to explode because of a past inspection, and I want to speak in generalities because you never know. I can't make a guarantee, but, helping dispel the myths, understanding how VA really, really works. What are some of the requirements? What are some of the hacks even different? And that some lenders have different requirements than others. And it's not the loan, it's the lender that's putting that requirement on there. And then also helping the sellers that you work with understand this down payment assistance is helping someone who might otherwise not have a chance at homeownership become a homeowner, and how it works. And don't just automatically, disregard it, because, as realtors, you can really be a force for helping to bridge some of the gaps. Thank you, Janine. Yes, that is so Janine just posted the website for AC Boost.
For CARs too. Steps toward homeownership.
Thank you.
Let's see. We have a question is around what we can do with some of the system. For example, your point that some groups are less likely to have large down payments at a disadvantage when competing in cutthroat markets.
I think that's my question. Like, what can we as realtors, like as a buyer's agent, other than try to be like encourage people, but like manage expectations? This may take longer and be, positive cheerleader. Like, what can we do to try and help change that system? It feels very overwhelming, like a very serious mountain to be climbed that needs to be climbed. I see Pam Hoffman and Lori Orazi, shout out to my former office of people who know how I worked. And so, and also Joan, who I worked with at my first, Joan Simmons High at my first company. So most of my clients were buyers, and especially at the beginning. That's how a lot of us start off, and a lot of them were people of color. And so some of it is within your own business, and then we talked about some of the other things you can do kind of on the larger scale. But what I will say is, the tools that I learned, and this is it's not, and Jenny Eric, hi. So something that I did with my clients. So when you're working, and Denise and I had a great panel discussion where we talked about, some of the things that you might have to do if you're working with folks with less generational wealth, particularly the Black community, Latino community, is that it is important to kind of start early, maybe not just go out and start looking at houses right away, kind of manage those expectations, talk about what's going on in the market. help support them with understanding all of the costs, the closing costs, the hidden costs. If they get an estimate from a lender that is missing sewer lateral or something like that, kind of and the transfer tax is too low, making sure that you're aware and that you help manage those expectations so that they can make offers that work and that they don't also get into this crazy fast process where people sometimes feel like they have to waive contingencies. Some people, I used to tell people, not everybody can waive contingencies. Not everybody's going to be comfortable. It's a personal decision, hugely risky. And just because everybody's jumping off a bridge doesn't mean you have to. And, helping them understand that even if when they remove their contingency and they get that final loan estimate from the lender, what is that likely going to look like? And so there is a little bit more upfront work, but with doing that upfront work, you can really empower your clients with less generational wealth. And it's not just people of color. People from the LGBTQ community often don't have as much family support or may have more student loans as well, but helping them to then be able to be nimble in the market when the time comes for them to make offers. And, it may take longer and, but I do think that, it takes some grit and some scrappiness, but that upfront work, can often pay off. And so I will just put that encouragement out there. And I'm sure the market is more difficult than it was when I was in it, but I felt like it can't get any worse. And, here we are today.
Never say never.
I know.
All right. Well, we've done it. We're at an hour. Are there any last remarks or questions for our wonderful guest? This again has been, go ahead, Lori.
Hi, Janine, and hi, Farrah. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for putting this together and just reminding us that we need to think about it. Some of us get a little complacent and think, I don't have prejudices. We have to think about it. We really do. And this is wonderful. And it's made me think a lot more too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. Good to see you.
And don't forget, there are lots of programs at Home with Diversity, Fair Haven, Fair Housing, C2EX. So there's lots of things that are being offered to really open our minds and expand how we think and how we do business. It's I know it's changed my life. I would love to give all the credit to staff. I didn't do anything but show up. So thank you to Vina and Emily. And of course, big thank you to Farrah. We hope we see you again soon. If you ever have any questions about anything, please get a hold of me, get a hold of staff, utilize the website. We are here to make your world a little bit better. And we want to make sure that this fair housing, DEI, and real equity continues to happen, especially here in our neck of the woods. So thank you again, everybody. Privilege and pleasure to see you all, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Great to see everyone. And hi, Ruth. Hi, Joan Dark.